Before we begin today's video, I want to share a quick update. YouTube has demonetized this channel, so we now rely completely on your support to make these videos. If you'd like to help us continue spreading the word of God, there is a donation link in the description. God bless you. Most people think they know what the Bible is about. They only know stories of Jesus performing miracles and heroic victories where the good guys always win. But anyone who has actually read it knows the Bible refuses to sugarcoat the truth, bringing us face to face with the most disturbing story in the entire Bible, the Book of Judges. This book shows the ugly reality of what happens when people turn their backs on God, taking us on a brutal journey into the deep shadows of the human heart. Why would God include such a dark story of corruption and societal collapse? Because we need to see the darkness to understand why we desperately need the light. This book is a warning label for humanity. It shows exactly what happens when a society abandons truth, rules, and God. It reminds us that without a moral compass, the total freedom we desire will eventually become the cage that destroys us. To understand how dark the Book of Judges gets, you first have to understand how bright things were right before it started. Just before this book begins, the people of Israel were living in an era of incredible victory. Joshua had just led them into the Promised Land, where they witnessed absolute wonders. A raging river stopped flowing right before their eyes, allowing them to cross on dry ground. The massive stone walls of a fortress city collapsed from nothing more than the sound of their shouts and trumpets. After defeating powerful armies, the people finally received the land God had promised to their ancestors. At that moment, the people possessed everything they could ever desire. They had clear instructions from God on how to live. The land around them flowed with milk and honey. With the visible presence of God dwelling right there among them, it looked like the dawn of an eternal golden age. Failing seemed absolutely impossible. But success is a very fragile thing. It only takes a little bit of comfort to make people forget how much they depend on God. The Book of Judges begins shortly after Joshua dies. The great leader is gone, and a new generation is growing up. This is where the tragedy begins. After that whole generation had been gathered to their ancestors, another generation grew up who knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. This is the disease of spiritual amnesia. It only took one single generation for the people to forget everything. The children of the people who saw the miracles did not know God. They heard the stories, but the stories meant nothing to them. They were born into comfort. They inherited the houses they did not build. They ate from the fields they did not plant. Because they did not have to struggle for their freedom, they did not value it. When you forget where your blessings come from, you start to believe you earned them yourself. And when you believe you earned them yourself, you stop being grateful to the one who gave them to you. This new generation of Israel decided they wanted to do things their own way. They looked at the surrounding nations and decided that fitting in was better than standing out. When God gave Israel the Promised Land, he gave them a very specific instruction. He told them to completely drive out the corrupted nations that lived there. This was not just about owning land, it was about protecting their hearts. The surrounding nations worshipped false gods. They engaged in terrible practices, including sacrificing their own children. God knew that if his people lived side by side with these nations, they would eventually start copying their behavior. But driving out the remaining nations was hard work. The Israelites were tired of fighting. They looked at the people living in the valleys and thought about how convenient it would be to just make a deal with them. The people of the land had advanced farming techniques. They knew how to grow grapes and wheat in this specific soil. They also had better technology. They had chariots made of iron, which were like the military tanks of the ancient world. The Israelites were afraid of their weapons and desired their farming secrets. So, instead of obeying God, the Israelites made a compromise. They decided to let the people stay. They even forced some of them to do hard labor. On the surface, it looked like a smart economic decision. Why destroy a perfectly good city when you can just tax the people living inside it? But this compromise was a slow poison. What began as simply living next door to one another quickly turned into doing business together. Trade naturally led to attending the same festivals, and before long, the Israelites were marrying the people of the land. And that is when the ultimate betrayal happened. The Israelites started worshipping the local gods. They started bowing down to statues of rain gods and fertility gods. They thought they could add these new gods to their worship of the true God. They wanted a religion of convenience where they could pray to whoever gave them the best harvest. This is how a nation rots from the inside out. They did not fall because a massive foreign army invaded them. They fell because they opened the door to corruption and invited it to sit at their dinner table. Once the people turned away from God, they lost His protection. They had broken the agreement they made with Him. Because God is a loving Father, He did not just ignore their bad choices. He allowed them to feel the painful consequences of walking away from Him. He removed His protective hand, and the nations around them began to oppress them. The very people they thought they could control suddenly became their cruel masters. This sets up a repeating pattern that happens over and over again throughout the book of Judges. Many people call it a cycle, but it is really a downward spiral. Every time it repeats, the situation gets worse, and the people sink lower into the darkness. Here's how the spiral unfolds. The people of Israel turn their backs on God, leading Him to allow an enemy nation to conquer and oppress them. Soon, the suffering becomes so unbearable that they finally cry out for rescue. In His mercy, God hears their pleas and raises up a judge to defeat the enemy and restore peace. Yet, the moment that deliverer passes away, the people inevitably slide back into their old habits, often behaving even worse than they did before. It is a tragic and frustrating process to watch. God is incredibly patient. He responds to their cries every single time. But the people never truly change their hearts. They are sorry that they are suffering, but they are not sorry for their sins. They just want the pain to stop so they can go back to living however they please. The first rescuer God sends is a man named Othniel. His story is very brief, but it is important because he represents what a good leader should be. The people are suffering under a cruel king. They cry out for help. The Spirit of God gives Othniel strength. He goes to battle, he wins, and the nation has peace for 40 years. He does not have any recorded scandals or terrible character flaws. He simply does his job, follows God, and brings peace. But Othniel is the only normal story in the entire book. After he dies, the people immediately return to their terrible behavior. This time, God allows a very large and powerful king named Eglon to rule over them. Eglon oppresses the people for 18 years. He demands heavy taxes and forces them to live in misery. When the people finally beg God for help, God chooses a man named Ehud. Ehud is from the tribe of Benjamin. The text gives us a very specific detail about him. It tells us that he used his left hand instead of his right. In the ancient world, warriors were trained to use their right hands. People who used their left hands were often seen as different or even disadvantaged. But God uses the things the world thinks are weak to accomplish His plans. Ehud comes up with a very clever and daring plan. He makes a short, sharp sword and hides it under his clothing on his right leg, because almost all men drew their swords with their right hands. Guards only checked the left side of a person's body. When Ehud goes to deliver the tax money to King Eglon, the guards search him but find nothing. Ehud asks to speak to the king in private, claiming he has a secret message from God. The arrogant king sends his guards away. When they are completely alone, Ehud uses his left hand to draw the hidden sword and defeats the oppressive king in a swift and shocking moment. Ehud escapes through a window, rallies the army of Israel, and leads them to a massive victory. This story is uncomfortable for many people to read. It involves deception and a very graphic defeat of an enemy. But it shows us that during times of absolute moral crisis, God uses imperfect people and unexpected methods to save a nation that does not even deserve to be saved. The spiral continues downward. After a long period of peace, the people forget God yet again. This time, they are terrorized by a Canaanite king who has an unstoppable military force. His general commands 900 chariots made of iron. For 20 years, the people of Israel are paralyzed by fear. The roads are empty. Village life stops completely. Everyone is hiding. In this atmosphere of total terror, the men of Israel are completely broken. They have no courage left. But God raises up a leader who breaks all the traditional rules of the time. He chooses a woman named Deborah. Deborah is a prophet and a judge. She sits under a palm tree, and the people come to her for wisdom and guidance. She is the only judge in the book whose authority is based on her wisdom and connection to God rather than physical strength or military background. Deborah summons a military commander named Barak and tells him that God wants him to lead an army against the iron chariots. But Barak is terrified. He looks at the enemy and looks at his own weak soldiers, and his faith completely fails him. He tells Deborah that he will only go into battle if she goes with him. He trusts her presence more than he trusts God's promise. Deborah agrees to go, but she tells Barak that because of his lack of courage, the ultimate honor of the victory will not go to him. The enemy general will be defeated by a woman. When the battle happens, God sends a massive rainstorm. The dry ground turns into deep mud. The 900 iron chariots become completely stuck. The ultimate weapon of the enemy becomes their biggest weakness. The enemy general runs away on foot and hides in the tent of a woman named Jael. Jael pretends to offer him safety, gives him warm milk, and lets him fall asleep. Then she uses a tool used for setting up tents to defeat him permanently. Just like Deborah promised, the great victory was secured by a woman. This story highlights the pathetic state of Israel. The professional soldiers were too afraid to act, so God used two brave women to do the job. It is a powerful moment, but it also shows how far the strength of the nation has fallen. If this video is blessing you and you'd like to help us continue on this journey, you can find the support link in the description and pinned comment below. As the darkness grows deeper, the heroes become more and more flawed. The next major judge is a man named Gideon. When we first meet Gideon, he is hiding inside a hole in the ground used for crushing grapes. He is trying to secretly separate wheat so the enemy does not steal it. The enemy this time is a group of desert nomads who sweep through the land like locusts, eating every crop and stealing every animal. An angel appears to Gideon while he is hiding and calls him a mighty warrior. This must have sounded like a joke to Gideon. He is terrified. He questions God. He asks why Israel is suffering if God is truly with them. He demands that God prove himself. God is very gentle with Gideon. He gives him signs. He allows Gideon to test him by making a piece of wool wet with dew while the ground stays dry, and then making the ground wet while the wool stays dry. Finally, Gideon gathers an army of 32,000 men. But God tells Gideon that the army is too big. If they win with that many men, they will think they did it themselves. God reduces the army down to just 300 men. He tells them to attack a massive enemy camp at night using only clay jars, torches, and trumpets. When they smash the jars, wave the fire, and blow the trumpets, the enemy camp wakes up in a total panic. The enemies start attacking each other in the dark and run away. God delivers a miraculous victory using a tiny group of men with absolutely no real weapons. Gideon becomes a national hero. The people ask him to become their king. Gideon says the right words. He tells them that God is their only king and he will not rule over them. But his actions tell a completely different story. Gideon acts exactly like a king. He takes a massive amount of gold from the spoils of the war. He uses this gold to make a sacred piece of clothing that a high priest would wear. He sets it up in his hometown. The Bible tells us that the people of Israel start worshipping this gold object. This is a tragic turning point. Gideon, the man who was called by God to destroy false idols, ends up creating a new idol for the people to worship. He leads the nation right back into the darkness. He has many wives, acts like royalty, and leaves behind a fractured family that eventually kills each other for power. The hero who saved the nation physically ended up destroying them spiritually. If Gideon was a flawed hero, the next major judge is a complete tragedy. His name is Jephthah. His story shows us what happens when people forget the character of God completely. Jephthah is the son of an outcast woman. His family hates him. His brothers force him out of his home and tell him he will never receive any inheritance. Jephthah runs away and becomes the leader of a gang of tough, violent men. He lives on the edges of society, surviving by his own strength. Years later, a powerful enemy army threatens the nation. The very leaders who threw Jephthah out of town come crawling back to him. They are desperate. They beg him to lead their army. Jephthah agrees, but only on the condition that they make him their permanent ruler if he wins. He treats the situation like a business deal. But Jephthah does not just make business deals with people. He tries to make a business deal with God. Before he goes into battle, the Spirit of God gives him strength. Victory is already guaranteed. But Jephthah does not trust God's grace. He thinks he needs to bribe God to ensure he wins. Jephthah makes a terrible, reckless promise. He promises that if God gives him victory, he will sacrifice the very first thing that comes out of the doors of his house to greet him when he returns home. He thinks like a pagan. He thinks God desires extreme, foolish bargains. Jephthah wins the battle. He comes home expecting a servant or an animal to walk out of his doors. But the first person to walk out is his only daughter. She is dancing and celebrating his safe return. Jephthah is crushed. He blames his daughter for his own foolish mouth. The Bible describes a heartbreaking scene where the daughter accepts her fate, and Jephthah follows through on his tragic promise. God never asked for this. God hates this kind of behavior, but God remains completely silent. He allows Jephthah to face the horrifying consequences of his own spiritual ignorance. Jephthah won the war, but he lost everything that mattered. His story proves that having faith is not enough if your faith is placed in a God you have invented in your own mind. Jephthah believed in God, but he did not know God at all. The spiral takes us even deeper. The next major judge is the most famous, but also the most disappointing. His name is Samson. Samson has the best beginning of any character in the book. An angel appears to his parents before he is born. The angel tells them that their son will be special. He is dedicated to God from the womb. He is given specific rules to follow to show his dedication. He is not allowed to drink wine. He is not allowed to touch dead bodies. And he is never allowed to cut his hair. God gifts him with supernatural physical strength to begin rescuing Israel from the Philistines. But Samson is a walking disaster. He is arrogant, impulsive, and completely driven by his emotions. He does not care about freeing his people. He only cares about getting what he wants, especially when it comes to women. From the very beginning, Samson treated his calling like a joke. He repeatedly broke his sacred promises to God, demanding to marry a woman from the enemy nation, touching the carcass of a dead lion to scoop out honey, and attending wild parties filled with wine. His incredible strength, meant to be a tool for deliverance, was instead wasted on settling petty personal arguments and seeking revenge for every perceived insult. Samson represents the entire nation of Israel. He was given a great calling. He was set apart by God. He was given incredible gifts. But he wasted all of it because he preferred the temporary pleasures of the surrounding culture. He thought he was invincible. He thought the rules did not apply to him. Eventually, his lack of discipline catches up with him. He falls in love with a woman named Delilah. The enemies offer her a fortune to discover the secret of his strength. Delilah begs him, cries, and manipulates him day after day. Samson is physically the strongest man on earth, but he has the weakest will imaginable. He finally gives in and tells her the truth about his hair. While he is sleeping, his hair is shaved off. But the hair was just a symbol. The true tragedy is described in a heartbreaking verse. Samson wakes up and thinks he will just break free like he always does. But the text says he did not know that the Lord had left him. His strength was never his own, it was a gift, and because he treated the gift with such disrespect, it was taken away. The enemies capture him, they blind him, they tie him in heavy bronze chains and force him to turn a grinding wheel in a prison, doing the work of an animal. The champion of Israel is reduced to a blind slave, making flour for his enemies. But God is a God of second chances. During a massive festival where thousands of enemies gather to mock Samson, they bring him out to entertain them. They place him between the two main pillars of the temple. In this dark, blind, and broken moment, Samson finally prays a genuine prayer. He asks God to remember him and give him strength just one more time. God answers his prayer. Samson pushes the pillars apart. The temple collapses, and he defeats more enemies in his dying moment than he did during his entire life. It is a moment of victory, but it is a tragic victory. Samson could have been a great peaceful leader. Instead, he is a cautionary tale about wasted potential. After the story of Samson, the book of Judges shifts. It stops talking about foreign armies and judges. Instead, it tells two smaller, deeply disturbing stories about everyday life in Israel. These stories show us what happens to a society when the foundation of truth completely crumbles. The first story involves a man named Micah. Micah steals a large amount of silver from his own mother. When his mother curses the thief, Micah gets scared and returns the money. Instead of correcting him, his mother blesses him and uses the stolen money to have a silversmith create a carved idol. Micah takes this idol, places it in his house, and creates a small personal shrine. He makes priestly garments and declares one of his own sons to be a priest. Later, a traveling religious worker comes by, and Micah hires him for a yearly salary to be his personal priest. Micah says, "Now I know that the Lord will be good to me, since this Levite has become my priest." This is the ultimate example of a homemade religion. Micah breaks the basic commandments against stealing and making idols. He mixes the worship of the true God with pagan practices. He thinks he can buy God's blessing by hiring a religious professional. He treats God like a lucky charm. Eventually, an army from the tribe of Dan passes through the area. They are looking for a place to live because they failed to conquer their own land. They see Micah's priest and his silver idol. They simply take the idol and offer the priest a better job. They tell him he can be a priest for a whole tribe instead of just one man. The priest eagerly accepts the promotion, showing that his loyalty is only to money, not to God or the truth. The tribe of Dan goes on to completely destroy a peaceful, unsuspecting city to take their land, and they set up the stolen idol as their official center of worship. This story shows us the death of spiritual truth. When people decide to invent their own version of God, religion just becomes a tool for the powerful to exploit the weak. Everyone is simply doing what is right in their own eyes. The final story in the book of Judges is so dark and so painful that it is difficult to even comprehend. It is the absolute bottom of the downward spiral. It shows us that without God, God's own people can become worse than the pagan nations they were supposed to drive out. A traveling man and his female companion are on a journey and need a place to stay for the night. They specifically choose to stop in an Israelite town because they think they will be safe among their own people. An old man invites them into his home. But as the night falls, the men of the city surround the house. They are aggressive, wicked, and acting like animals. They beat on the door and demand that the traveler be brought outside so they can commit terrible acts of harm against him. This scene sounds exactly like the ancient wicked city of Sodom that God destroyed with fire. But these are not pagans, these are Israelites. To save his own life, the traveler makes a cowardly and unthinkable choice. He forces his female companion outside into the hands of the violent mob. He locks the door and leaves her there. The men of the city subject her to ultimate cruelty throughout the entire night. When the morning comes, the traveler opens the door to resume his journey. He finds her collapsed at the doorstep. He speaks to her with cold, emotionless words, telling her to get up, but she is dead. The traveler takes her body home. In a shocking and gruesome display of anger, he divides her body into 12 pieces and sends one piece to each of the 12 tribes of Israel. He demands that the nation see the horror of what has happened. The nation is outraged. They gather a massive army and demand that the town hand over the wicked men who committed the crime, but the tribe that the town belongs to refuses. Their tribal pride is stronger than their sense of justice. They decide to protect the criminals and go to war against the rest of Israel. A brutal civil war breaks out. Tens of thousands of Israelites kill each other on the battlefield. The conflict is so severe that one of the 12 tribes is almost entirely wiped off the face of the earth. When the fighting stops, the remaining Israelites look at the destruction and weep. They realize that a whole tribe is about to become extinct, but instead of seeking God's healing, they try to fix the problem using their own twisted logic. They decide to attack another peaceful town, wipe out the people, and take the young women to give to the surviving men of the nearly destroyed tribe. When that is not enough, they encourage the men to hide in vineyards and kidnap young women who are dancing at a religious festival. They use kidnapping and violence to fix a problem that was caused by violence. The moral compass of the nation is completely shattered. They cannot tell right from wrong anymore. The book of Judges ends abruptly after this terrifying civil war. There is no final victory. The very last verse of the book leaves us with a chilling summary of everything we have just witnessed. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. This sentence is the key to unlocking the entire book. It is a profound statement about human nature. We want the freedom to decide for ourselves what is good and what is evil. We want to be the kings of our own lives. But the book of Judges proves that when everyone is their own king, the result is complete chaos. When there is no absolute truth, the strong will always consume the weak. If I believe that stealing is right for me, and you believe that protecting your property is right for you, who decides who is correct? Without a standard of justice that sits above human opinion, society devolves into violence and chaos. We can see the echoes of the book of Judges in our world today. We are told to follow our hearts and do whatever makes us happy. But just like the people in the days of the judges, our hearts are broken and easily deceived. When we throw away the moral boundaries established by God, we do not become enlightened. We just end up trapped in our own destructive cycles. We see the decay in our fractured families, our divided communities, and our self-serving leaders. So why did God include this incredibly dark story in the Bible? Because a doctor cannot heal a patient until the patient admits how sick they truly are. The book of Judges is the diagnosis of the human condition. It strips away all our pride. It destroys the illusion that we can save ourselves. Throughout the book, we see that political solutions are not enough, military victories are not enough, even having heroic leaders is not enough. The judges were deeply flawed people. Othniel passed away. Ehud used deception. Deborah was a bright light in a dark time, but the darkness returned. Gideon led the people into idolatry. Jephthah did not understand God's heart. Samson could not conquer his own desires. Every human leader eventually fails. They are weak, sinful, and temporary. The continuous failure of these leaders creates a massive, desperate ache for something better. The darkness makes the people crave the light. The chaos makes the people long for a true, righteous king. The book of Judges prepares the world for Jesus. It shows us exactly why human effort will always fall short. We do not just need a judge to rescue us from our temporary political enemies. We need a savior to rescue us from the darkness inside our own hearts. Where Gideon was afraid, Jesus moved forward with perfect courage to the cross. Where Jephthah made a foolish sacrifice that ruined his family, Jesus became the perfect sacrifice to save his family. Where Samson gave up his calling to satisfy his selfish desires, Jesus gave up his own life out of selfless love for us. The judges could only offer temporary peace for a few decades. Jesus offers eternal peace. The judges could defeat armies with swords and trumpets. Jesus defeated sin and death with pure grace. Perhaps the most amazing thing about the book of Judges is not the darkness of the people, but the incredible, unyielding patience of God. Read the story from God's perspective. He rescued these people from slavery. He gave them a beautiful land. He offered them his constant protection. And in return, they ignored him, forgot him, traded him for statues made of wood, and broke every rule he gave them. Any human leader would have walked away. Any human judge would have declared the nation a lost cause and abandoned them to the enemy. But God never completely walks away. Even when he steps back to let them feel the pain of their choices, he is always listening for their cry. Every single time the people cried out from the bottom of their self-made misery, God responded. He sent rescue. He sent help. He worked with the broken, flawed, weak people he had available. He used the fearful farmer, the outcast rebel, and the arrogant strongman. He refused to let the darkness completely win. This is the ultimate message of the darkest book in the Bible. The human heart is capable of terrifying depths of evil. We can forget God in a single generation. We can compromise our values until we look exactly like the corrupted world around us. We can make a massive mess of our lives by demanding to do things our own way. But God's grace goes deeper than our deepest failures. His mercy is more stubborn than our rebellion. If you feel like your life is a downward spiral, if you feel like you keep making the same mistakes over and over again, the book of Judges is speaking directly to you. It tells you that no matter how low you have sunk, God hears the cry of the desperate. It tells you that you cannot fix your life by just trying harder to be your own king. You need to surrender the throne of your heart to the only King who is truly good. The darkness in the book of Judges is real, raw, and terrifying. But the darkness is not the end of the story. The chaos sets the stage for the arrival of the true King. And when the true King finally arrives, the shadows disappear and the long, dark night of the soul is finally over. If this message spoke to your heart and you want to help us keep creating videos like this, you can find a link to support our work in the description and the pinned comment below. Your help allows us to keep sharing the truth of God's Word with everyone who needs to hear it.